You're listening to the ProcureTech podcast, your weekly show for all that's cooking in the digital procurement space. Yes, we've got the hottest startups, thought leadership, and conversation from visionary industry experts, and definitely no stiff corporate content. I'm your host, James Meads, Procurement Pro, Digital Nomad, and ProcureTech fanboy. And now, here's this week's show. Yes, welcome to another episode of the ProcureTech podcast, where every week we bring you everything that is exciting and fun and innovative in the procurement space. We are your weekly escape route from your email inbox, your firefighting, your supply chain problems, and everything else that you're tearing your hair out with. And this week, we've got something really, really educational for you, actually. We're not talking to a startup this week. Instead, we're talking to a very, very experienced practitioner on a topic that I think confuses a lot of people, but also excites us in equal measure. This week's topic is all about AI in procurement and AI in procurement technology. What is it? How is it impacting us? What's the future look like? And what even is it, and how does it work, and what type of things can it influence in our daily lives as procurement professionals? So I would like to introduce you to this week's guest. She is advisory board member and also associate partner at IBM. Melissa Drew, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you. This is going to be exciting.
Yeah, I think so too. Just give us a quick background of your history, and then I'm going to ask you the typical question of, are robots going to take over our lives?
Sure. I've been in procurement for 27 years. Started back in 1995, creating the first electronic RFI using federal grant money. From there, I continued on in the procurement and supply chain experience, and then started working with cognitive technologies in 2004. Again, working with another company who was developing a patented grammar-based technology to support AI in spend analytics. So since then, I've constantly been fusing how AI technologies are impacting procurement, not just procurement software, but how procurement professionals need to rethink their digital transformation, and then also how they need to rethink their organization.
That's awesome. So yeah, that's a really long career going back to 1995 and AI. Where was it back then? Wow. So let's start then with, what are examples of AI that are out there that are not necessarily procurement related, but everyone would be able to recognize in terms of how that impacts day-to-day decisions that we just sort of kind of take for granted now?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the level setting so that the audience is using the same terminology that I am. There is a perception that the results of an AI solution, so an application that's infused AI technology, is more trustworthy because the machine was involved. And in reality, the opposite is true. It is the human who had to collect the data. It is the human that had to create those algorithm and models that enabled the AI technology to be able to consume them. And then that's where you get your outcome. So when we look at AI and cognitive technologies, we're excited about the future, but then exactly on the same side, exactly as excited as we are also extremely skeptical because the human intervention and the touch points are so high. So when we look at AI and cognitive technologies are everything that you need to make a better informed decision. But the difference between that and artificial intelligence, because I will not talk about artificial intelligence today, artificial intelligence is your driverless taxi cab, where the AI technology is automatically modifying its behavior and modifying the outcomes as new information is received without human intervention. So
as it becomes more intelligent, learning from the data that it's processing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So today, you and I are going to focus on these cognitive technologies, which means a human has to be involved as new information comes in. The models then have to be retested and revalidated versus true AI, which I'm not an expert in driverless automotive vehicles, is a very different type of technology and software.
So we're going to be talking about then the algorithms that it uses are going to be influenced by humans in
Hmm.
some way in terms of how they program what they want to get as the outcome.
Exactly. So
Right. Okay.
yeah, so then we think, okay, well, if a human is collecting that data and then the human is creating that model, how trustworthy can we be? So, for example, just in the news, Apple created a credit card algorithm, which is using AI technology. But unfortunately, they were recently accused of discriminating against women, and this triggered an investigation in New York Department of Financial Services. Another example, Amazon had an automated resume screener, but unfortunately, this resume screener was filtering out female candidates.
I read that actually,
Yeah,
yeah, because percentage wise, there are generally more male applicants than women in the tech industry. I think there was the reason that they gave, right?
yeah. So everything,
Yeah,
so when we think about AI, in order for these outcomes to be represented, we have to go and teach the models. And teaching the models means we're collecting data. So in Amazon's automated resume screener, the data they used was what we call retrospective or historic data. And unfortunately, majority of the resumes in that particular category on Amazon's website were all men. So when the resume screener was developed, it was developed using the data that they had available, which unfortunately was more male than female.
was more biased towards, yeah.
And that you brought up the exact word that everybody uses is how can we ensure that our AI is trustworthy? How can we ensure that the AI is not inadvertently, systematically producing prejudice or skewing the results toward one demographic population over another? And that's exactly what you just highlighted, bias.
If we go back then to the mid 1990s,
Hmm.
how has AI gotten so much better now? Is it just because we are better at programming it, or is it just because there's been such an incredible increased multiplication in in processing power that's enabled it to do more complex tasks, or is it a mixture?
So I got really involved in AI in 2004, specifically in procurement around spend visibility. So AI early on was really used as a way to augment the human. And that's exactly what it should be used for, to augment our human behavior, to take some of the things that we tactically need to do over and over again, and then be able to do them quicker. So, perfect example before working with AI technologies, it would take me 9 weeks of roughly 70 hours a week to synthesize, collect, normalize, and classify a procurement spend data. Then, as I started working with this tool in 2004 and 2005, and pulled in my expertise at the time to build out those models, we were able to do everything that I could do in 9 weeks at 70 hours a week, and we were able to do them in a few hours. That's what AI. That's why I get excited about AI is the ability to augment that human action, that human behavior, that human tactical activity and take exactly what I would do normally in thinking about how to classify and then be able to automate that. But then your question was, how has that changed from, say, 2004 to now? You made a very good observation. We didn't have a lot of data available to us. It's only been really recently in the past 4 or 5 years where we've had the ability to collect the data. And collecting data means we have to have the infrastructure to house it. So you hear terms like data lake and data warehouse, and then there's a new term called the lake house. These are all the infrastructure that companies need to house all the data before they can even write the models and do the outcome. So it wasn't really until these last 4 or 5 years that we started to have the infrastructure to house the data. And then we started to have the AI technology that can consume the data. And then just recently, IBM started creating new technology that would allow the AI to even run faster than it is before. So it's everything's really coming together in like that perfect storm, but in a positive way.
So, just a quick interlude because there are a couple of things that I really want to make you aware of because I think they will be valuable for you. So, number one, we now have a monthly newsletter where we bring you curated content of everything that's happening in the digital procurement space. If you want to get that, just head to procuretechpodcast.com /newsletter. Enter your name and email, and we'll get that delivered straight to your inbox. Number 2, if you're a head of procurement or a center of excellence leader, and you're perhaps a little bit confused or overwhelmed with what's out there as best of breed digital procurement technology, especially if you're a mid-sized business, schedule a call with me. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes in this episode. Just hit that schedule a call link and we can have a quick chat to understand your challenges and what potential solutions out there may be suitable for your organization. And now let's get right back to this week's show. One thing that whenever I've spoken to startups and we talk a little bit about AI, the best way that I can explain it, it'd be cool to get your thoughts on this, is that AI enables a lot of what I call the spade work or the grunt work to be automated, which enables then procurement professionals then to free up their time to do what we're all told we need to be doing now, which is building our soft skills and engaging with stakeholders and doing SRM and all that type of stuff that enables procurement to be viewed as a more strategic and value-added function rather than just an administrative / cost down function. So in terms of where it requires or where it will still require the human guidance, going back to, a robot's really going to take all of our jobs. And I think we know that the answer is no, but I asked it sort of just to be a bit controversial. But the where the human comes in is, I guess, being able to interpret what the AI is telling us, because a machine can't yet do that task, can it?
Right. So you'd mentioned biased, so I'm going to tie bias back into this response. There's the data bias, which is how do we ensure that we're collecting all the data? For example, if I have an algorithm that says you qualify for a loan, but I don't, you have to be able to explain it to me, and I have to feel comfortable with that I recognize that the data was using the right breadth of data. And even though you and I were very similar, somebody needs to point out and explain why the AI made that decision. And then over time, as we become more comfortable with that decision, then we become more comfortable with AI being used lately everywhere, which seems to be everywhere. The other bias is now you've got the data, and we feel comfortable that we've got the data and it's, focused on everything we need. Now you've got something called social bias, which is the individuals who are writing the models. If the individuals who are writing the models inadvertently have a blind spot, then when they test it, they're testing it with their own perception of what it should be. So these are the things that we're still trying to overcome. And you'll hear lately a lot of things on the news around policies. Should we have policies for AI? Should we be regulating AI? Who's going to be doing that? That's a whole nother subtopic that has just exploded and is still so fluid that we're starting to see policies and regulations everywhere, at the EU, at the country level, in the US, at our federal government level, and then also now at the state level.
And that's kind of similar to whether you trust news stories as well, isn't it? News sources, depending on your political persuasion, will probably influence what type of media outlet you're more likely to believe as being truthful or fact-based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of tied back to the same thing. I mean, it is a bit of a buzzword out there, especially in terms of how software companies use it to sell their product and to get investment. How can procurement teams leverage the added value and the enhancements that AI can offer right now? And if they're looking to procure a digital solution that uses or leverages AI, then what sort of questions should they be asking that software supplier?
That's the question of the day. So Kearney put together a analysis along with a couple other companies, and they published it. And they were looking at the same thing. How many companies out there in procurement are actually using some level of AI? And the chart got so big that it became unreadable. Everybody is using some sort of AI. And whether it's in commodity and directs, whether it's catalog management, ERP, category solutions, risk, contracts, performance, anything that you guys can come up with in procurement, I can probably point to at least 2 or 3 companies that are actually using some level of AI. So for example, Jaggard's a supply chain solution. They use deep learning and neural networks for predictive supplier analytics and to give you real-time recommendations on whether or not that supplier is going to achieve their delivery. There's a company, a logistics company, Canio. They use AI not directly to the consumer, but internally to create the most optimal delivery routes, which reduces their vehicles on the road by 10%, which reduces the fuel cost, the general maintenance on the vehicle, and then they in turn can push that savings onto the customer. So the analytics or the AI is being used in multiple ways. Spend visibility, we talked about that earlier. Now, you did ask me a question about whether or not it's going to replace. There are some tactical activities where right now I can have an individual in my marketing department who is doing social media postings and pulling together social media content. And that's typically a junior level position. We hire somebody out of school for that. But I can tell you right now, there's at least 3 companies out there who can automate that process and either replace that individual or give you the opportunity to shift that individual to more value added strategic activities within your company.
I think that's the key, isn't it? Especially for more sort of operational and tactical roles. It kind of begs the question. At the moment, you've got in many companies the model of using a BPO in a low cost country to perform that, but those roles probably in 3 to 5 years are going to be pretty much automated out of existence. So then it's what do you then deploy that resource to do? Assuming that you've got the same headcount, you're probably going to need fewer people, but more highly skilled people to be able to interpret the results that AI driven technology is giving you to be able to give you a competitive advantage. So maybe it's worth looking at how would procurement teams then potentially look in the future if they are leveraging this technology to its full effect.
So if I'm in the procurement department and I'm looking to either evaluate software that claims it's using AI, whether I'm going to use it in procurement, whether I'm looking at it for my internal stakeholder, or whether I'm buying it for someone else, there are things that you can look for. If someone says that it's scripted automation or it's a rules-based automation, or they tell you it's using if-then-else statements, that's not AI. That's not mimicking human thinking, and it's not learning as new inputs are added. If the customer, if the vendor, the supplier, isn't excited to explain to you how it works, they're probably not using AI. If someone tells you that once the data goes through the AI and the outcome, and then it requires somebody from that company to then manually intervene and manipulate the data, or they ask you that once the data gets outputted, you will need to manually go in and intervene. Yeah, they may have been using AI, but what that tells me is that AI hasn't been maintained. Because if the AI had been maintained over the years, there shouldn't be a heavy lift on you or the supplier to manually intervene and manipulate the data. Number 4, do you understand how the data was used? For example, if you're looking at the AI to solve a solution globally, is the data that's being used by that supplier coming from the US and coming from Asia Pac and coming from the EMEA? If not, those are things that you discuss early on. They need to be able to explain to you very clearly and show you some type of data mapping that here are the gaps in our data. And that's okay. Maybe there's some opportunities that you have as the individual buying it where you can supplement some of that data with your own. And then I think the biggest one that I've noticed is AI solutions don't pop up overnight. And that's something that's been very interesting. I've seen a lot of companies where they pop up and say they have AI, but they've never spent the time and effort to build it out. One particular company, a startup, spent 3 years building their technology, patented it, and they didn't even have their first customer until last year. And now they're being praised as one of the most innovative strategic sourcing, predictive sourcing, applications.
Because it takes time to train it and to get it to give the output that it needs to give to be useful to a commercial enterprise.
Right. So a lot of these companies, that was I mentioned, from the Carney analysis, a lot of these companies have been around for years. You may have not heard about them because maybe they were in the background building their technology, or somebody like an EcoVadis, a DocuSign. These are companies that we've heard of in procurement, but they've been adding and building on over and over again. So there's two types. The ones that have been hidden for the last 3 years that appear to be popped up, but they've put a lot of effort into making sure that it's right. And then there's the other kind where they've been around, you've heard them, you've probably already been working with them, didn't even realize that AI was a part of the solution until just now.
Talk to me a little bit about machine learning, because that's like a subsection of AI, isn't it?
Yes. So underneath the cognitive and AI technologies, we have, I'm going to just the most common ones: machine learning. Then there's something called deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning. So machine learning is how we create algorithms, and it's really the most common. It's how we predict our outcomes, how we do our patient diagnosis, how we assess the data for spin visibility. But deep learning looks at not just data as the input, but images and videos and other visual inputs. So companies like language translations for Google, customer recommendations, driverless taxis, facial recognition for iPhone, that's all deep learning where it's taking non-text information and then being able to make a decision.
So with both of those, then the key to the software being useful to the end user is having a critical mass of data that it's been able to work with and process to be
Mhm.
able to provide an outcome that is predictable enough to have added value to the end user. And I guess that goes back to your previous point then, that companies, startups may have been around for years, but they
Mhm.
have to perfect the technology in order for it to be, a commercially viable product.
Which I think brings up what happened with iPhone and the facial recognition. Where's the balance for this solution? How much did we as the consumer feel comfortable with the facial recognition software of the iPhone, because now you're using that facial recognition to get into the phone, versus somebody who spent the last 3 years trying to perfect it? And I think and I hate to, call out iPhone, but I think that's a really good example. Somebody had really put a lot of effort into it, and they had documentation of all the different images and where the images came from, and looking at the different geographical nuances of images and the social, images, and people with hats and sunglasses and different, facial features and smiling and laughing, and all of those things had to go into that recognition. And I think what's interesting is in procurement, we always look at 80/20. We put a lot of our time into the 80% because we're going to spend double the time if we look at the 20%. But the opposite is true when we look at cognitive technologies. You want these companies to spend that extra time on that 20% because that's where it's going to fail. As the examples we used
Yeah.
earlier, the credit card analysis, the Amazon auto screener. Just recently, Microsoft was in the news where they were trying to train their chatbots, and unfortunately, people were using inflammatory language, and so the chatbot was picking that up and thinking it was normal, and then it was turning around, and that's how it was communicating to people on Twitter.
Using that to its customers.
Yeah.
So putting my commercial hat on, then,
Mhm.
if I was going out and purchasing some software that utilize this technology, I guess the key thing that I would need to know or to understand in terms of understanding my negotiation potential with the software company is how mature is this machine learning algorithm? Because if the software company needs me and my data as a customer to perfect that, then I, as a buyer, potentially have more negotiation potential in terms of being an early client or early customer of that startup, to be
Mhm.
able to sort of work with them hand in glove to develop and perfect the technology, because that has a huge value proposition to them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, for example, hey, I'm working with a supplier and they mention AI. Well, where is AI actually being used in your solution? So I've there's a checklist. If you're using AI is typically there to solve a problem. So what problem are you solving? Can you give me a fact sheet that outlines all the data that was used in developing your models? Can I see the governance structure? So remember, the whole structure behind this is very vast. There's the groups of people that are working with the data, there's the groups of people that are writing the models, there's probably a separate group of people that are testing them, and some companies are actually creating review boards to review the results before they even say it's ready for public use. How often do you
Yeah.
maintain them? I mean, there's just a lot of questions that we need to ask now that we never would have thought about because we really weren't focused on the AI component of that solution.
Right. And if we look into the future,
Mhm.
how do you see procurement teams being able to work hand in hand with these technological advantages in terms, how can procurement sort of take the next step in terms of, if I use Phil Eidson's from Art of
Hmm.
Procurement's favorite buzzword of being a partner to the business, because I do think that is the way that as a function we're ultimately going, and we will move. It will take time before CFOs recognize it, but I do genuinely think we're moving away from just being a cost savings delivery function and more of a wider business value function, especially if you're thinking more about triple bottom line and sustainability and that type of thing. How can we evolve to leverage this, but and to be able to perform where we should be instead of doing all of the administrative and firefighting stuff?
I'm absolutely in agreement that the role of procurement is no longer cost savings. It is we've evolved out of that. I think there's still some companies out there that still have that maybe philosophy, but in order to grow, in order to remain competitive in this multiple, technology driven world, our procurement teams have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I say that, it sounds funny, but I say that with a lot of like heaviness behind my voice is up until now, and I used to be on the procurement side. I used to be in the procurement department, across vendor management and supplier diversity and procurement operations and contracts and sourcing. And I can tell you the processes haven't technically really changed a lot since 2008. But things are changing so rapidly that we have to have a different mindset. So we have to be comfortable with knowing that we are going to be uncomfortable. We have to be more comfortable with change. We have to recognize that there's these new roles within the organization called chief data officer, chief analytics officer, and it's going to be imperative, like imperative, that the chief procurement officer ensures that procurement is in their agenda. I can already cite several examples where I've walked into a company and they're building a huge, data warehouse that supports the organizational data so that they can make better informed decisions. But then when I look at the data, procurement data is not even in there. But procurement data is one of the key backbones of making decisions for the company.
Right. Every company knows what they sell, but not many understand what they buy.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned it earlier, startups. Most of the new AI technology is being developed by startups and small businesses who are not restricted or hindered in their innovation growth strategy, which then, going back to your question, how's that impact me in procurement? There's going to be a emergence of new suppliers. How we look at new suppliers, our policies around suppliers, our old policies around three bids and a buy. Think of it this way: 40% of the suppliers that you will work with in 2022 are not the suppliers that you're currently doing business today.
So you think that we need to be a lot more agile then in the way that we audit and onboard and bring suppliers on and partner with them?
Yes, absolutely, because you are either going to be partnering directly with that technology. So, for example, the company that I spoke of that created that new strategic sourcing application, you're either going to be working with them directly, or you're going to be working with maybe a large application vendor who doesn't have a lot of AI technology, but they have a lot of APIs that connect to other small companies that have it. And there's a couple of companies out there that I can think of, Fair
Yeah.
Markets. They have an AI technology that solves a particular problem, and it's great. It's something that these larger applications haven't spent the time focused on. So instead of these larger application companies going out and trying to solve it, they just built the API that connects to that one.
That can connect to it and integrate it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but either way, when I look at procurement, I'm still going to have a contract with both of them.
Yeah. And do you think then that the overall category management model will become obsolete as we go down this route? Because I find it quite it's very siloed, isn't it? Oh, that's not my category. Go and speak to Bob down the hallway. He manages that. It doesn't give that level of flexibility and agility to manage this type of relationship, does it? Because if you've got a certain category manager that manages one area of IT spend and then someone else that does another piece, it's kind of difficult to manage that holistically with that model.
No, I agree. I recall that when I was in procurement, there was always a tier of suppliers that we called them corporate suppliers, where we had multiple stakeholders. And then the question is, who actually owns the relationship of that supplier? And because that supplier supports multiple things, technology, services, software, suddenly it's a supplier that fits across three categories. And then the same question pops up, who owns the relationship with them? I mean, we just started seeing that with the normal components of category management. And now you bring in AI and you bring in all these new innovative companies, and some of them are going to be very specific to a problem that they're solving, but they're solving a problem. They're not saying I'm in this category. I'm in procurement category. This is where I need to sit. They're saying I'm solving a problem, and that problem can span across all categories. I think that's a very good observation. Yes. I don't have the answer to it yet, but I think that's a very good observation. Absolutely.
No, none of us do, but I'm certainly with you in terms of the thought process. Yeah, I would concur with that, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So my last question, Melissa, if I was coming into a new greenfield role as head of procurement and I had to put together a digitization strategy, what would be the one overarching tip that you would give me?
I think the procurement organization of the future is not going to look like the procurement organization in the past or the present. If I was a new chief procurement officer and I had the luxury to build something brand new, the first thing I would need to do is throw out the playbook. I would need to throw out everything I've learned or what I thought to be true and truly start greenfield. And I think that's going to be I think that's going to be really hard. I mean, we've been doing three bids and a buy, or we've had these same procurement policies for the last 20 years. It's going to be difficult to throw that out. It's also going to be difficult to ensure a data literacy culture within my procurement team because we've never had to understand those.
Especially in places where it's difficult to fire underperforming employees. I'm thinking Europe in particular. That's a massive challenge.
Mm-hmm. I would love to have that role, a new chief procurement officer where I was given the room to create a procurement office of the future. I would definitely need to connect with that chief data officer to ensure that my procurement data is getting pulled in. I would love to work with the chief analytics officer, which is where the models are being written, because there's lots of decisions that are being made in procurement today based on data. So I think when we look at the new role of the chief procurement officer, it's really looking at it from a couple different angles, building that procurement future, but being able to recognize that this AI technology is not just the technology that we're buying for our internal customers, but we, the procurement organization, are also a customer. And there's a whole roll of things that we could be doing with that data and making decisions.
And that some of the stakeholders that we saw as being critical in the past may not be as critical in the future, and some that we may not have even have spoken to in the future. You mentioned the CDO and the chief analytics officer. They're going to be absolutely vital to you getting what you want and being included and incorporated into the overall company's data strategy. That's a fantastic observation, and yet it's probably something that most CPOs haven't maybe considered in the past. I don't know. But it's a very, very important point. Yeah. So if anyone would like to learn a little bit more about your work and what you do, what's the best place that people can find you and get in touch?
LinkedIn. I made a vow that I would be open to knowledge transfer and knowledge sharing to anyone.
Fantastic. So I will link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're probably going to get lots of connection requests.
Sharing information is the only way that we're all going to move forward together.
Yes.
And if we have half of our procurement organization going off in one direction and the other half going off in the completely opposite direction, then overall as a procurement industry, we're not doing anything different. And we're gonna, and I hate to say it, but we're gonna still be the stepchild of the organization. If we've got chief data officers and chief analytics officers that are getting the priority, yeah, we need to make sure that we still have that really loud voice, that we're being heard and that we're being part of the agenda.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is your final value bomb for this episode. Melissa, thank you so much for reaching out and coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I've certainly learned a lot from the questions that you've answered today, and some of the observations that you've made. So I hope everyone out there as well sort of feels the same, and that we've been able to break this down into a sort of plain English explanation of what's happening, where are we going, and what do you need to be aware of and perhaps consider going forward. Because, yeah, it is a topic that you hear a lot about, but a lot of people scratch their heads and perhaps don't want to feel stupid to ask, well, what does all of this mean? So very, very insightful, Melissa. Thank you so much. And yeah, keep spreading the word and sharing your knowledge, because I think we need it in this space.
Yeah, more conversation in this space. Absolutely.
So that was Melissa, who was telling us all about AI in procurement. Just a couple of things before we sign off. If you like us, then don't forget to subscribe to the show where you listen to your podcasts. We put out a new show every single week, and we will be back again next week with another episode. Until then, take care, look after yourselves, keep delivering value, and bye for now.